This is called a squaring shear. It will only cut sheet metal up to 16 gauge. When you're talking about sheet metal, thin sheets of metal, this machine can only cut up to 16 gauge. Sheet metal is measured in gauge. That means 16 gauge equals 1/16 of an inch thick, or 0.0625 inches thick. 1/16 equals 0.0625 inch thick. Okay? That is the maximum that this machine can cut. There are many sheet gauges that are much thinner than that. The gauges start at 0.0067. That is 36 gauge. The smallest. Below that is foil. So 0.0067. 6.5 thousandths of an inch thick is the minimum of sheet metal. Anything below that turns into foil, like aluminum foil and things like that. Sheet metals range from 6.5 thousandths up to 0.239, or almost a quarter inch. Above 0.239, around a quarter inch, they start becoming plate metal because it becomes much thicker and much heavier, so they call it plate. This machine can only cut up to 1/16 of an inch, which is 0.06. So it can cut sheet metal from 0.006 to 0.06. This metal right here is 26 gauge. 26 gauge is 0.018 inches thick. It's thin, but it is still tough material, and you'll see once you start handling it that for being so thin, it's actually pretty tough material. That's called a squaring shear. Sometimes in industry they call it a foot shear or a jump shear. They call it a foot shear because you operate it with your foot. This foot pedal brings down the blade that's attached to this big piece of metal here. The blade is here in the corner. You can see from here down is the blade attachment. It's attached onto this big piece of metal. And all it does is create a scissor action where two pieces of metal come together like this, like a scissor does. And that metal is hard enough to be able to cut off this metal like a scissor. That's why you can't go much thicker, because it will damage the machine. It's only made to cut certain thicknesses of metal. The pedal operates. Whenever you come up to a piece of machinery, or you're going to operate a piece of machinery, you want to test it to see if it works. You don't want to, especially if it's power, you don't want to just flip it on, and if it's malfunctioning, it's going to be at full force and malfunctioning. So even a piece of equipment that's manually operated, you want to test it to see if it's functioning properly. So that's why I was testing it. Operate the foot pedal. See if everything looks and sounds okay. Hearing is one of the biggest senses of seeing if something is operating correctly in the metalworking industry. Because you can hear if things are grinding together or banging, and I might not necessarily see that happening. But I see it is moving up and down. I can hear that it sounds normal. So that's a good test to see if the machine is operating correctly. Safety. Some safety things you have to be aware of when you're operating this machine is, of course, the blade. Don't ever stick your fingers, even playing around, underneath the blade. Because if you're just messing around and someone goes by and kicks the foot pedal, you're going to lose the tips of your fingers. Keep your hands away from the blade, always. As well as this guard in the front. That guard is called a hold down. It holds the metal in place while the blade comes and cuts it. So you can see this is the first thing that moves down. And right there, it would be holding down the metal while there is still a gap underneath the blade over here. So there's still a gap, right, under where it would normally be cutting, because this yellow blade will come down first and hold that material in place while you go ahead and cut it. Okay? So keep your hands out from under the hold down guard and the blade. Pinch points. That is one underneath the blade. It's a pinch point. It will pinch your fingers underneath there. There are other couple pinch points that you have to watch for, and you always have to watch for pinch points in mechanical equipment. Okay? There's one here where it slides up and down. If you happen to rest your finger in there, okay, and then kick the pedal down, the bolt is going to come down and crush your finger in there. Watch the pinch points. Don't stick your fingers in here. Hold your hands free of the machine. Another one is in the spring. If you're holding on to the top of here and your finger is by the spring, it could pinch your finger in the spring. Okay? These are called pinch points. Keep your hands away from pinch points at all times. They could crush your fingers. Another pinch point, and people like to do this all the time, is hold your hand up here. When you have this machine down and depressed, there's a gap here. And if you're holding the machine like this, and your thumb is in there, and you let the handle up, it's going to crush your finger in there. You have to be aware of all the mechanisms on the machine and where your hands go. Okay? Also have to be aware of bystanders and other people, because some people like to sit on the machine like this. It's not a good idea. If you were a bystander, stay away from the machine. Don't put your hands on machines like this. If someone is leaning against the machine, make sure you tell them to move away before you operate the machinery. Another big one is your feet. Always have to watch out for your feet too. Hands and feet. Always be aware where your hands and where your feet are. Because this pedal will go all the way to the ground. So if you are standing with your foot underneath the pedal and you stomp down on the machine, it is going to smash your foot. So beware where you are placing your feet. Make sure your feet are out of the distance. My best suggestion is to put it down, make sure your foot is out of the way, put it in a spot where you're ready, and then lift it up, hold your metal, and cut. Okay? The last safety thing I recommend is your knees. Beware of your knees, because when you're operating this machine, you have to lift your leg. So don't lift your leg and hit it into the machine. There's bolts out here that can hurt. So, and your shin. So when you lift up, right, and you're depressing the pedal, watch your knee and your shin. Another thing about depressing the pedal is, once you make your cut, depress the pedal with your foot. Don't just slip your foot off of it because it can also smash up and hit your shin, your knee, or damage the machine. It's meant to be pressed down and then depressed with your foot. Okay, that's the safety of the machine.